Josh and Frankie. What a couple of dumb shits.
Hello, Primates! You found Primus Tracks, congratulations! There are a bunch of other places to find us, too, if that's your jam. We are at Primus Tracks on Instagram and Threads. PrimusTracksPod@gmail.com is the email address for all your Primus Tracks needs. And there is a Facebook page run by the man in the ivory towers of Primus Tracks there in Mexico City, all the way from the 39th floor, looking down upon his kingdom, fiefdom, what have you, Mr. Frankie Bearstein.
Hi, Josh. Hello, listeners, Patreons, everyone.
Welcome to the world of Primus Tracks. Frankie, today we are talking about Rubberneck Lions, whatever they are, track 7 from the Oysterhead record, The Grand Pecking Order. We have some miscellaneous debris, Frankie. First of all, I have to apologize to Jeremy. Jeremy sent an email a long time ago, and I didn't get to it. So Jeremy, this is for you. Jeremy says, thank you for all the work and diving deep into the Lesson Primus world. Although I love all the musicians he's played with, Herb is my favorite drummer. But I've always wondered about Brain and Les after C2B3. That would be Colonel Claypool's Bucket of Burning Brains.
Bucket of Burning Brains.
Did Les ask him, I think he means Brain, did Les ask Brain to tour with Primus when Herb didn't play? Or on Green Naugahyde? Or in the Fancy Frog Fungi bands? I remember Tim at the first Bonnaroo. I know Les and Jay go way back, but Jay has bands to commit to as well. When Primus reformed in 2010, from what I remember, the first and only call was to Jay Lane.
Yes. I believe so.
Yeah. And I believe that's in the book, Over the Electric Grapevine, by Greg Prado. I think, as I recall, maybe it was in an interview. I just remember Les saying, there's only one guy I'm going to do this with right now, and it's Jay Lane. That would have been in 2010. And Brain has resurfaced from time to time for those one-off Holy Mac shows, since the turn of the century, right?
I think he also joined Les for a one-off performance of Over the Falls, right?
Yes. Was that
Way
the
back.
Eddie Jennings benefit show?
Yeah, it was way back.
Yeah. So, ever since the Bernie Brains project was put to bed, they've played a couple of times together. I'm sure they're still friendly. But Brain has moved into the world of scoring music for movies and video games and other media. Oh, and he's also, of course, working with Axl Rose quite a bit. But he doesn't really tour anymore, so Brain's a busy dude.
You know, that brings to mind, I found an interview with Brain. It's not so recent, but they asked him in the interview if there was any regret in his life, and he said that the only thing that he regretted was complaining about silly things during some of the best moments of his life. And he highlighted that he was on tour with Primus, and he was on tour with Buckethead and Bernie Worrell, and he somehow found stuff to complain about. And looking back, he wishes he had lived more in the moment. I found that quite fascinating.
It's a great life lesson for us all. Thank you, Brain, for that insight. Absolutely. And Frankie, thank you for sharing that. And Jeremy, thank you for your email. And I am so apologetic as to be beside myself that I let it sit for so long. By the way, Frankie, Jeremy was at the Westbury show as well.
Really?
His review was holy mackerel equals holy shit. I think he very much enjoyed that. He also said, precipitation can be boring and repetitive, but my buddy's reaction to the sound of the upright gave me a new appreciation.
Cool.
Nice. It really, when he hits that low note, it really does shake you in the nether regions, doesn't it? Thank you again, Jeremy. I appreciate that. Another piece of miscellaneous debris, Frankie. We had an email or a contact. I almost said a caller, as if this was some kind of AM show overnight. Actually, I would love to be the host of Coast to Coast AM. I think that would be really fun. And I'm going to put my hat in the ring for that. I want to talk about UFOs and shadow people as much as I want to talk about Primus, Frankie.
I would love to talk about the Flatwoods Monster, about Patty Gimlin, about the Dyatlov Pass. Yeah, sign me up.
If you have a question about the strange and unexplained, please email primustrackspod@gmail.com and we will start a new segment called Conspiracy Corner, hosted by Frankie. Our good pal Larry Lalonde made an appearance at Dean Del Rey's Bon Scott tribute show in L.A., and there's a video out there of Larry ripping it up on some AC/DC tunes, which is a lot of fun to see.
Yes, it's always amazing to see Lur doing basically anything.
Yeah, there was a pretty studded, stacked lineup. Scott Ian of Anthrax was there. And of course, they credit everybody's bands, right? It said Larry Lalonde of Primus, Scott Ian of Anthrax. But my favorite credit was Josh Freese, Every Band Ever. He was there too. So and that sounds about right. So big time lineup that Dean Del Rey was able to put together for his fairly annual, I guess, Bon Scott tribute show.
I just wanted to point out that Herb mentioned in a post today that apparently Mike Bordin was a surprise guest for the masterclass of Academy. How mind-blowing is that?
So, now I didn't attend the masterclass, but if I were an aspiring drummer or had any kind of drumming chops, I would definitely attend. And I would be probably in some kind of trance, knowing that Tim Alexander is speaking directly to me, among other people. And then Mike Bordin shows up. I think that'd be beyond the pale. I wouldn't be able to do anything after that. So what a great treat for the Stick Academy attendees. I think there's another masterclass is coming up. Tim just posted about that. So if you are a drummer and you want to learn from the best, Stick Academy is where it's
best
at.
of luck to Herb with Stick Academy.
That's it for Miscellaneous Debris. It is time to talk about track 7 from the Grand Pecking Order by the trio known as Oysterhead. This track is called Rubberneck Lions. It checks in at 5 minutes and 17 seconds, making it the second longest track on the album, Frankie. Credits, music, Oysterhead, lyrics, Trey, and Les. And you will tell us some history.
Rubberneck Lions was premiered at the New Orleans show from 2000 in its skeletal form. We're going to listen to that in a few moments. It's quite interesting because the structure is there, bar a few changes here and there. The lyrics are also mostly there, with a few differences too, but essentially the track is already there. So they just did some minimal tweaking in the studio for the album. But it's amazing how they pretty much delivered fully formed Rubberneck Lions back in 2000. The track came back for the 2001 tour for complete rotation. Of course, it was also performed at Bonnaroo in 2006. And of course, it was performed at each of the 4 stops of the recent Oysterhead reunion shows. So we could say that Rubberneck Lions is basically one of the signature tracks of the band. If it's a headlining spot or if it's a festival date, it's a guarantee that they're going to play this one. And I would venture to say that it's because they probably had a lot of fun doing so. At least that's what transpires from live recordings and videos. It's also one of their signature jams because, as you will see from the versions that we have today, it gets quite extended during live performances. It's certainly one of the jam vehicles for the band. So that's the life history of Rubberneck Lions. Now, what do you think, Josh, about sampling a little bit of that skeletal version?
Yeah, why not? And when you say jam vehicle, I'm going to call this a jam jumbo jet. Your selections for the live cuts later, 17 minutes, 15, and 13 minutes. Wowzers. So we're going to dig into those later. But yes, let's take a look at that initial performance. Because you're right, it feels almost fully formed. So this must have been one when Stewart went through the tapes of this performance. He pulled it out, and they didn't seem to do too much to it when they made it, when they recorded it for Grand Pecking Order. That sounds about right.
Now let's hear how the lyrics were just a little bit different.
Call down.
Trying to be dead. I open my eyes, but they're too damn red. Oh, rubberneck lions on the live bed. From my body cactus, from my eyes and they bread. I choose to live on water and bread. Cause the rubberneck lions run out of bed. A rubberneck lions run out of bed. A rubberneck lions run out of bed. A rubberneck lions run out of bed.
So the one line I heard that was different was "my eyes are too damn red." Is that what he says?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I believe so.
I let that go because one of the things I really appreciate about Trey, and I'm not making fun of him, I think he does a really good yell.
Yes.
That maintaining that one note, whatever note he's hitting there, and just the yell singing. He does that very well.
I love the performance. I agree about that quality in terms of Trey's delivery, but didn't you get the feeling that he was kind of stumbling over Les a little?
I think their timing was off on some of their cues there, which is to be expected, even with 3 pros going up there with only just a couple of days to prepare. It's going to be rough, but they were able to tighten it up for the record. But it does feel like it's largely already there on that initial performance in May of 2000.
Which is really amazing.
And the fact that they didn't change much. They liked that one enough to keep it largely as is, or as was, for the record. Speaking of the record, this one's interesting, Frankie. This has Stewart starts us out with kind of a shuffle that builds, of course, to that chorus. And then about 2 minutes in, I think there's a lot of stop-start stuff going on with some solos in between. And to me, it's really interesting that they chose this one because this is more of a jam. It's a looser number, and but it's all contained to that kind of specific groove. Les and Stu kind of stay locked into this for 5 minutes on the record, and of course they take it different places live. And we get a decent payoff at the end. Stewart, at the very end of the studio track, Stewart gives us some manic sounding drumming as he rips towards the end. So let's sample some of those. Frankie, you've provided some time codes today, so we're going to go to 24 seconds for the first verse of Business here.
Rubberneck Lions is a lime bed. Double barrel under the pillow under my head. You don't wake a man when he's trying to be dead. Cause of the Rubberneck Lions is a lying bed. Rubberneck Lions is a lying bed. I bought a cactus from a mice named Fred. I choose to live on water and bread. Cause of the Rubberneck Lions is a lying bed.
So in the live version, I hear Rubberneck Lines. That is a hard, that is a long I. Lines. In the studio version, we're hearing more lions. He's not lions, it's lions. He's kind of, I don't know if he's slurring that on purpose, but it's kind of a lions. There's a hint of lions there. He's not saying lines like he does in May 2000 in that initial performance. So to me, there's a slight shift there. We'll talk about the lyrical quality of this in a bit, but there's a shift there, and I think there's a reason for that. And also that vocal delivery, there's a kind of a fairly simple bass line underneath what's going on, and along with what Stu's doing and with his shuffle. But Les is getting down there into that vocal fry a little bit. I don't know if I can even approximate it right now, but he's getting down into a place that you don't normally hear him. And I'm not entirely sure what he's channeling. Maybe he's channeling somebody who doesn't want to be alive, or at least be part of the waking world. Frankie wants to hear the first solo.
Rubberneck Lions as a lion's bed.
There's that yell. I like that yell. I heard there's a couple call downs.
Very cool solo, in my opinion.
What do you like about that one?
Fits the track perfectly. It's not just like meandering or noodling, it actually serves the track. I think it carries the atmosphere of the song quite well. It's it's kind of compact but still quite complex. So I think it's a pretty nice addition to the song.
Yeah, and I could be wrong about this, but it sounds pentatonic to me, but it's delivered with conviction. So it's, it's nice. But I did hear a couple call downs by Les underneath in there. It's very funny that he's making that a regular part of the Oysterhead experience. And of course, we hear it throughout his different bands, because that's his signal. It's my favorite. Honestly, Frankie, I think this track is about some kind of breakdown, but here's the first breakdown of the music. This is that start-stop part. And then we're back into it. What drove you to choose that part?
Just a change in dynamic. You mentioned that Les and company kind of stick to a structure and a group, which is true. But what makes this track such an interesting piece of music to listen to is that it's also full of these little twists and turns. It does follow a straight line, but every now and then, it shift. So I think that's what makes it quite an interesting song.
Our pal Jordan Kahn talked about type 1 and type 2 jamming. So there's type 1, which stays within the structure of the tune, and then there's type 2 jamming, which meanders off, takes off into a different direction. And I guess that's part of the Fish lexicon. In the other tracks that we've heard so far, they get into a little bit of type 2 with a lot of stop-start that you don't hear in the studio version. And then here they give us some stop-start in the studio version. I'm sure we'll hear some amplified versions of that later on. From your live cuts, but I am curious about that. Having not listened to a lot of live Oysterhead in quite some time, if I even did 20 odd years ago when people were distributing those shows, immediately after leaving the venue, I think I remember hearing a few. Oh, Frankie, you're all about the breakdowns. Let's go to the second breakdown.
Yes, my favorite one.
I like that syncopation
Rubberneck Lions as a lion bed.
Then we get that iteration of Rubberneck Lions. I have not counted how many times they say Rubberneck Lions.
What do you think about the breakdown? I think it has, I don't know, it's difficult to describe. Is it like this kind of reggae or ska feel?
From Trey, yeah, I like that syncopation going on there because it does lend that feeling to it. I agree. And so it's a different, you're right, he's introducing a different feel there, and then they break back out of it and take us back to that initial groove.
Yeah.
It is a cool little piece right there, because if you're not listening carefully with that kind of approach, you can get lost. You can lose the one sometimes because of that syncopation. So it's a cool little thing. Let's listen to that payoff in the last 30 or so seconds.
Rubberneck Lions is a lion bed. 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 Rubberneck Lions.
So they make us wait for it, but it's a pretty satisfying conclusion, and I love that final roll that Stu does there. You know, I will say this track and it's been quite some time since I listened to this album front to back for pleasure, and this track, I didn't remember it very well coming back to it, Frankie. I that's not to say it's no good, but I just didn't have a solid memory of it. Of course, once I turned it on, I remembered it, and there was plenty to remember, but it just didn't stick with me. So I'm curious for you, from a music perspective, when you're listening to Oysterhead, I don't know if you're skipping tracks, but is this one that gets regular play from you when you're listening to your studio versions?
This is one of the standout tracks on the record for me, definitely. And I think it mostly has to do with the lyrics, which I enjoy quite a lot, and the second breakdown, which I find to be a true piece of ear candy. I guess what stood out for me is that, you know, I kind of pair it with previous song that we discussed, Armies on Ecstasy, and both are great songs, but I find myself, kind of getting lost in Armies on Ecstasy occasionally. I mean, like, it's playing and I dig it, but I'm not following through with the entire track. Suddenly it's done and I didn't notice. And Rubberneck Lions kind of grabs me by the neck since the beginning, and it doesn't let go until it's done. I cannot take my ears off the song. It's just so good.
Now, do you think that's colored by knowing it's one of the four that they pulled from the initial live performance? Because to me, that tells me, not your interpretation, excuse me, but knowing that it's one of the four pulled from the initial performance, that tells me they really liked it and wanted to make something of it. And so knowing that they held it in high regard, or at least worthy of inclusion, that this is kind of what they were going for. And so maybe that colors my thinking on it, but I'm curious if that does anything for you.
It could have something to do with that, but also the fact that I'm very drawn to the song lyrically.
Okay.
Whenever I stumble upon something Les wrote, which I don't understand, I just get obsessed with it, and I can't stop thinking about it. For instance, Holy Mackerel. I love that song from a musical perspective, but I'm also fascinated by it because 20-odd years later, I still don't understand what Les is singing about in that song. And with Rubberneck Lions, it was a similar experience because the first time that I heard the song, but I truly paid attention to it.
Yeah.
I remember just thinking, what is this song about? Like the imagery that it evoked with some of the lines. I mean, I just couldn't make heads or tails about it. And then I remember looking up some interpretations, and I discovered what could be the most reasonable explanation about the song. And it was kind of a good situation because sometimes you can be disappointed by what the song really is about. But in this case, the explanation did not take anything away from the track for me. I still enjoy it for what it is, even if the subject matter is completely unrelatable for me on a personal level. I still think that it works incredibly well in terms of metaphors, and it's so well written that it could be pretty much about anything, and I think I would still love it.
Speaking of those lyrics and the content therein, they are opaque. They are quite mysterious. So when you went into your lyrical investigation, what did you find?
A tourist who is visiting sites of interest, a sightseer, excursionist, or tripper, or, definition number 2, a person who stares inquisitively, strains to watch, stares curiously. The cars slowed down and the drivers rubbernecked after the accident. So that was the first approach that I found, was that apparently the expression means that you're staring at something, right? Like in a very intense manner. And then when I transferred that to the title of the song, I was thinking, so is the title referring to lions which are staring at something? But then I said, no, maybe it's the opposite way. Maybe the narrator or the main character in the song is the one who is staring at the lions, right? He's rubbernecking at the lions. But then I heard the New Orleans version, and upon discovering that it was originally called Rubberneck Lions, I was thinking, well, it's got to be lines of cocaine, right?
That would be a pretty good conclusion to make. I think that's an accurate conclusion there, Frankie.
What I understood from all of the different theories that I read is that it is sung from the perspective of a person who is just lying in his bed after consuming drugs, and he's probably having hallucinations. One of the lines that was really one of the most interesting for me was, I bought a cactus from Icer named Fred.
Yeah.
And somebody mentioned that it could be a needle. So a cactus has needles, and that's why this person is injecting into their body. So it could be not cocaine in particular, but maybe it could be all kinds of drugs that this person is consuming. Yeah. Never mess with a man when he's trying to be dead. Like he doesn't care about anything anymore, right? Yeah. He's just trying to get high until he passes away, right?
So you're telling me this is not about a guy lying in bed watching a marathon on the National Geographic Channel, like staring at the King of the Beasts.
That's the cool thing. It could also be about that, and it would still be pretty great. But I think the line that gives the whole thing away is double barrel under the pillow under my head. Mm-hmm. So he's ready to pull the trigger literally at any point, right?
And to me, it's he's ready to pull the trigger at anybody who would come around to disturb him or visit him, because he says right after that, you don't wake a man when he's trying to be dead. Because if this guy's taking his drugs to check out for a while and then you come and arouse him, he's going to whip out the double barrel shotgun on you because he's going to be startled. We'll say that.
What's a miser, by the way?
A miser is somebody who does not like to spend a lot of money.
Okay.
So a miserly person is cheap, or not willing to part with their money very much.
I choose to live on water and bread could be taken quite literally, right? If all of his money is going into drugs, he might be content to literally live on water and bread on a daily basis, right?
Yeah, and I think appetite goes out the window with a lot of these drugs as well. So the idea that one, he can only afford it, and two, that's bread and water are seen as the most basic elements of sustenance. So he can either only afford that, or that's what he chooses to eat just to barely keep himself alive, so he can continue to.
Exactly. It's a self-inflicted punishment.
Yeah.
And another thing that I want to highlight about the song lyrically is that you can tell that the lines that each person is singing are the ones that fit their songwriting style.
Their individual voices. Yeah.
Exactly. The first verse is totally less, but black clouds hanging over shady ground, full moon rising above my head. That's totally Trey. That's the way that, from what I've heard, that sounds like lyrics that he would write. And it all works so well together, right? I mean, they mesh so effortlessly. I'm old and I'm homely, but would you come around? This one is also, I think, quite easy to interpret. Ears too deaf to hear a sound, and I never listened to a word you said.
Yeah.
So obviously people are trying to talk him out of this lifestyle, but he's not hearing anyone, right? He's not interested. What do you think about Aaron looked to Moses for his daily bread?
There's a biblical reference alert. So, and because of that, I choose to live on water and bread. Aaron looked to Moses for his daily bread. Boy, that took me back to my Bible stories from elementary school when my parents made me go to Catholic school. So as I recall, Moses, of course, led the Israelites through the desert for 40 years. and they survived on manna from heaven. And so they had to they gathered it. They would roll it up, basically, essentially make some kind of bread out of it, from what I recall. At least that's how I remember reading or hearing about it. Aaron was Moses' brother. He was essentially the high priest of the Israelites, but they worked together a lot. So Aaron looked to Moses for his daily bread. Makes that biblical reference, but then it comes back around to I choose to live on water and bread. So the Israelites, of course, when they were in the desert for 40 years, were barely surviving. I guess this narrator is comparing himself to somebody in exile. This is a self-imposed exile for this guy, perhaps, just checking out of the world and getting loaded.
That makes a lot of sense. What about 3 strips of bacon on my toasted head, 2 over easy on a roll and I'm fifth?
I love that couplet. And
yeah, it's so good.
No idea what it means. When you think of breakfast, 3 strips of bacon, toast, 2 over easy eggs, but it's on my toasted head. So there's some imagery going on here, but 3 strips of bacon on my toasted head is funny, but it also indicates something. And of what I'm not sure. Yeah, 2 over easy on a roll and I'm fed. So somebody's coming over to make sure this guy eats. And I don't know if that's literal food or if that's another drug reference. Couldn't tell you. It's not my world.
So in general, you agree that this is definitely about a drug addict.
That's what I take away from it, although there are other possibilities. And when lyrics are this opaque to me, Frankie, I have fun with them because there are myriad possibilities. So, and literally the rubbernecking part, as you described, craning one's neck, or my favorite visual of it is when somebody is driving on a roadway and they see a collision and they do that long stare where they end up turning their head away from what's ahead of them and they're looking at the collision as they drive by.
Oh.
They're not paying attention to the road. So just that motion, if we're going to go with the drug metaphor here, that dude's snorting some really long lines. Way across. I have no idea if that's the case. That's a possible interpretation. The other one, if we're going to take it at face value, Rubberneck Lions, as you suggested, this guy could be staring at some lions, or he could have some lion gargoyles perched on his bedposts, because that's what gargoyles do. They have the giant eyes, and many of them are there for protection, especially if they're placed on the outside of a building, exterior of a building, or in a garden. Gargoyles have a lot of different purposes, and I'm not recalling them off the top of my head. However, protection is the one that I recall. So there's that. And then I did a little cursory searching around the term rubbernecking beyond the dictionary definition, Frankie. Now, this is an antiquated reference and use of the term, but back when there were party line phones in which people in a neighborhood shared one phone line, and the phone would ring with a different cadence for each residence. So if it was 3 short bursts, that could be your home. If it was 2 long and 1 short, that was the Joneses down the street, and so on, right? And so, so everybody shared a phone. That was the party line. If you picked up the phone to make a call, somebody could already be on it in your neighborhood talking to somebody. And so what I found was that that same term, rubberneckers, was used to describe people who would pick up the phone and listen in to conversations that their neighbors were having. So, so if you're rubbernecking the line, you are listening in on the party line to your neighbor's business. And so that was a common term that people used to describe the eavesdroppers who were listening in on their phone conversations. That would be, to me, that's a huge stretch, but I would love it if that's what this was about. And if he's just sitting there listening in on the party line to everybody else's conversation, every once in a while they go, "Oh, that's old Jim. Well, we better go check on him." Or "Jim, get off the damn line." And then they go, maybe they go check on him from time to time. I have no idea, but that's the one I want it to be because it's so obscure at this point.
I had absolutely no idea the expression could be applied to that situation. That is really interesting.
It is the farthest fetched one, therefore my favorite. You want to hear some Primates takes, Frankie?
Come on, let's hear them.
It sounds like you're issuing a challenge. If you would like your takes read on this very podcast, all you have to do is go to patreon.com/Primus Tracks. Check out all the options there, but the one universal constant is that if you post your take on the thread related to the tune up for discussion, I will read it right here. The more thoughtful, the better. Let's start with our pal Eric in Australia, Frankie. He says, it's the second of my favorite album tracks to come along and the first absolute ball terror. Now that's a piece of imagery for you. He says, it's hard to pick between this and Pseudo Suicide for best in show. Lyrically brilliant, and I love the musical ebbs and flows. That's possibly, is that what you were talking about earlier, Frankie? That ebb and flow quality to it? I think you were intimating that earlier.
That's what I was trying to express.
You and Eric are the same person. Our resident fish expert Jordan Kahn says, love this ode to recumbent nose candying with epic-less vocals, so I think Jordan agrees with you. The collab leans Trey, who was at the time more off the rails, or should I say on the rails. That means he was addicted to drugs. Jordan continues, he's a sober superhero now, but here relishes the dark side with meteorology, the Bible, wordplay, and food. According to Jordan, we're just dipping into the dark side of being on the nose candy. Brooks Delight says, not a go-to track for me. I enjoy it when I play the full album, but can't be found on any of my playlists. Simon Altman, also in Australia, says, love some of the long live versions of this track. Oh, you are in for a treat in a moment, sir. Our pal Ryan Rashan says, I like the trade-off on the vocals and then harmonizing for the chorus. Les seems to be channeling Trey with his vocal delivery in parts. That being said, I'd prefer less repetition of the lyrics and more jamming, which I'm guessing they do in a live setting. Ryan, you are 100% correct.
Totally.
John Shreve says, this track harkens me back to the swing era that happened while I was in high school. Must have been in the late 90s because I was there too. And intersects with what feels like Police sensibilities. The band, I hope not the law enforcement arm. Definitely one of the most unique tracks in Les's catalog, possibly one of the more generic somehow. Now that's a dichotomy. One of Les's most unique but generic. We contain multitudes, John Shreve. And our pal Anthony Del Preet says, best song on the album for me. Oysterhead in full swing, and Stewart is effing joyous on this tune. I agree. Right when Trey cuts into his first solo around the 1 minute 20-second mark, just listen to how Stu starts the beat on that ride. And he parenthetically says, yes, Josh! So we're feeling each other on that ride symbol. In a halftime sort, then within literally seconds of the start of the solo switches to double time. So effing tasty. Thank you all, Prime Matrons, for your takes. Quite thoughtful. And they did the double duty of reassuring Frankie of his lyrical interpretation. Nothing like a little ego boost from the Primates. It is time for live cuts. Sit back and relax. We're going to listen to 3 17-minute versions of Rubberneck Lions. Or perhaps just what Frankie wants us to hear. It starts with Broomfield.
February 15, the second date. Let's see what they have in store that night.
Nice, Phil. See, they're stopping and starting here, Frankie. You can tell they're working towards something here. This is great. I'll pause it there because they're starting to, I think, go off at a type 2 jamming there, but that type 1 was nice.
I really like how free-form Stewart's drums are on this live version. And it sounds totally on the spot, right?
Oh, I don't think Stu has missed a beat in 45 years of doing what he does. And then we're going to move forward towards the climax, so I have to slide my bar way over to the other end of this 17-minute monstrosity. And let's hear the climax. I'm really interested in that little lick Les is playing, though, because that's an interesting lick, and I would love to hear that come back around in some kind of songwriting process.
You never know.
So that was Broomfield 2020. We're moving back to Scranton. This is Scranton, Pennsylvania, July 3rd, 2021, and I believe the Dunder Mifflin Fest, right, Frankie?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's hear the intro here.
If knowing which direction you're going,
Astute listeners know what that is.
keep on growing. There's no sign that they are slowing. Is it raining? Is it
How are they going to get from there to Rubberneck? There it is. Okay, it's just start the bass line. I thought there was going to be some grand transition, but it was just, I'm going to start playing the lick. You guys join me.
That's something Les would do from time to time, even before the Chocolate Factory album was released.
Oh, that was Semi-Wondrous Boat Ride, correct? He was doing that pretty early with Primus, too. I'm pretty sure. Good old Semi-Wondrous Boat Ride, making an appearance with Oysterhead. Let's listen to some ambience. It wouldn't be Oysterhead without ambience. That's ambience, not ambien. I know we're on a drug song, but... I'm not hearing ambience, I'm hearing a nice solo there, buddy.
And once again, Les is going to pretty interesting places with his bass line, right?
Yeah. And then you can hear him right before I fade it out. You can hear him lead them into the next section or the next thing, whatever form it's going to take.
Yeah.
Musical communication is always so fascinating to me because I know I don't really have that anymore, or I don't know that I ever really did. However, when I jammed with a couple of guys in high school, we had that nonverbal communication from time to time, and it was like being on another planet. It was so interesting to me in retrospect that we were able to do that. Now, we weren't playing music of any value that anybody else would want to hear. We liked it because it was us playing it, but we kind of caught that a couple of times, that we were leading each other into a different spot or telling each other what we were going to do musically. Let's go to Atlanta, 2022.
A little Van Halen for you.
Let's hear what they got going on this one. Stop start. Call and response. Fun stuff. And they all bring it down. That's funny. We're getting a solo. I thought they were just kind of daring each other to like start the song or get into the lyrics. Like, you can do it. No, we're gonna play another solo. You can just hear the thought process. You can hear the communication happening. It's very interesting.
Yes.
Let's jam it out here. I mean, it is a 13-minute track, so we should probably sample that too. Less Than takes the lead. There's some cool sounds happening there.
I think this might be my favorite of the 3 selections that we played. What do you think about it?
I don't think I tore my balls yet, which is a good thing, because I need them. It's just fun to listen to the musical communication happening. And they definitely, obviously, I haven't heard the entirety of these tracks, but at 13, 15, and 17 minutes, I'm sure they're taking it out places. And for those of you that are into that sort of thing, I think these Oysterhead recordings are for you. So I should probably say this, Frankie. Rubberneck Lions, wake up. Get out of bed. Get some clothes on. Have some eggs. You've been tracked. Before we say goodbye, Frankie, we haven't done this in a while, and I feel remiss about it. We're going to give our patron shout-outs. Once again, patreon.com/Primus Tracks. We need to shout out our members, our supporters, the people that keep the lights on here at Primus Tracks Towers, and where I am in my underground Primus shrine. Thank you all so much for your support. The monthly hangouts are a blast. The bonus pods with our patrons, getting to know you guys is so much fun. And I'm looking forward to more. So let's thank these folks. Starting with Bo Campbell. Bo, thank you so much for your generous support. Joseph Pebler, thank you. I think I have a feeling this person is trying to make me say this, and so I will. Deluge Nuts. Good for you. Thank you for your support. John Gatwood, thank you. Jahani Coho. Less is more. That's Steven. Thank you, sir. Nick the Dutchie. That would be Nick in the Netherlands.
Nick.
Ryan Rashawn. Stephanie Wolfgang King. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Amber Porter. She's been a patron for quite some time now. Mr. Funknificent. Thank you for your patronage. Johnny Perona. Christian Rogers, otherwise known as Krangs, Matt Crakeley, Sculligan Val, Stephen Stang, Trish. Thank you, Trish, for your patronage. Anthony Del Preet, go Bills. Brooks Delight, our very first patron, Carlos Arizmendi. Chris Gentile, thank you for your support. There's another Chris right after him on the list. David Fraser Crane. Edwin Allen Richards IV. Now there's a name for you, Frankie. How do you like that one?
Great.
Guy sounds like landed gentry. Goodness. Eric in Australia. Jesse Calton, who is not in Australia. John Shreve. Jordan Kahn, our resident fish expert. Carl Reinsch. Had a great bonus pod with Carl recently. Keith Thompson. Kevin. Matt Ray. Mike Tuckerman. Our pal Porter, Sarah Markham, Simon Altman, also in Australia, Travis in Alaska, number 1, Mr. Tamby Meatfoot, and Travis in Alaska, number 2. Thank you all for
what a list. That is incredible.
Fantastic list. I think I know which Travis is which. I think I have a good idea. Thank you all so much for your support. If you want to get in on this, patreon.com/Primus Tracks.
One last thing, Josh,
Please.
and only came to me during the recording of this episode. So if we had business to attend prior to the episode, it's miscellaneous debris. But what would you call a little bit of information at the end of the episode?
Let's call it... Oh, I'm not very good at branding in the moment, but we could call it... Let's think about this, because on a Primus record, they always come back around to the intro. Los Bastardos, we could call it Pork Chops, we could call it Salmon Men. We got a lot of choices.
I think this is an interesting piece of information, kind of a cliffhanger, to leave this episode on a mysterious note. But I read an interview with Les where he said that, well, of course you're familiar with how the Delirium came to be, right?
Yep.
He was going over that entire story and explaining how he met Sean Lennon through Cage and how he discovered that Sean used to be a fan, all the story that you're aware of. But he did mention that Delirium, and in particular Monolith of Phobos, came out in 2016 in place of the original plan that Les had, which was a second Oysterhead album.
Oh, wow.
So that was in the cards back in 2016.
Obviously, those cards did not play out that way. How about this? How about when we have something here at the tail end that occurs to us, we call it the ends?
Cool. Yeah, I love it.
7 friends. Okay, let's do that. Primates, Primatrons, thank you all so much for listening and your support. Later days.
With a maze.